Sierra Ashton didn't have time for nonsense, especially not on a Wednesday morning, when her Wi-Fi crashed 5 minutes before a virtual investor call with a board full of sharks. "I swear, if one more thing breaks in this penthouse," she muttered, pacing across the sleek marble floors of her Manhattan duplex. Her assistant, Lauren, stood nearby with a tablet balanced in one hand. "Tech team's swamped. Can get a freelance repair guy here in 30 minutes. "Fine, just make sure he's not a creep," Sierra snapped, tugging her silk robe tighter around her waist and brushing an invisible thread from her shoulder. Exactly 27 minutes later, the elevator dinged. When the door swung open, Sierra expected some scrawny, awkward IT guy. Instead, a tall, broad-shouldered man stood there in a worn gray Henley and jeans, holding a battered toolbox in one hand and a little girl's hand in the other. "Hi, I'm here for the Wi-Fi," the man said, his voice deep, smooth, and oddly calm for someone standing in a penthouse overlooking Central Park. "I'm Vaughn Parker." Sierra blinked. "You brought your kid." The little girl, maybe 5 or 6, peeked up at her from behind his leg with a shy wave. "I'm Camilla," she said. "She's off school today," Vaughn explained. "Sitter canceled last minute. I can reschedule if this is a problem." Sierra hesitated. The investor meeting loomed, and she had no time to wait. "No, come in, just make sure she doesn't touch anything." Camilla clutched a little stuffed penguin and followed her dad inside, wide-eyed at the massive crystal chandelier and floor-to-ceiling windows. "It's the router, or whatever's connected to the router. It's been cutting out since last night," Sierra said, leading Vaughn toward the office. Vaughn crouched beside her sleek white desk, pulling wires and talking to himself under his breath, while Camilla sat cross-legged on the carpet, drawing in a notebook she pulled from her tiny backpack. Sierra hovered, arms crossed, watching Vaughn work. He didn't fumble, he didn't ask dumb questions, he just fixed things. "Found your problem," he said, glancing up at her. "You've got a smart system that's too smart for its own good. The router's overheating. Probably needs a full reset and better ventilation." She raised an eyebrow. "You're not just some guy who Googled this stuff yesterday, are you?" "I used to work in IT before," he paused, "before started working for myself." Sierra didn't push, she didn't care, except she kind of did. "I'll have it up and running in 10 minutes, he said, then added with a grin, "unless the Wi-Fi gods decide to smite me." Sierra blinked. Was that a joke? "Probably a bad one," he said, "but hey, I charge extra for personality." She didn't laugh, not out loud, but something about the way he looked at her direct, not intimidated, made her lips twitch. 15 minutes later, her Wi-Fi was working better than ever. "I'll send the invoice," Vaughn said, standing and brushing dust from his jeans. "Lauren will handle that," Sierra replied. She tried to return to her usual clipped CEO tone, but it wasn't landing as hard as usual. Camilla tugged on Vaughn's sleeve. "Daddy, can we go to the park now?" "Yeah, sweetheart, let's go." Sierra's eyes followed them to the door. "Wait." Vaughn turned, brows raised. "Do you fix other things, like TV, smart ovens?" she asked too quickly. He smiled. "Fix everything, even espresso machines." She nodded, almost like she didn't mean to. "Maybe I'll call again, if something else breaks." "Sounds like you've got a lot of high-maintenance appliances," he said, that same warm humor dancing in his eyes. She watched them disappear into the elevator, and for the first time in a long time, Sierra Ashton felt something other than stress. She felt curious. 2 days later, her espresso machine malfunctioned. It wasn't a lie, it made a weird noise. She didn't even wait for Lauren. She called Vaughn herself. "You again," he said when he answered. "You're becoming my favorite recurring client. Can you come today?" Camilla's with her grandma this afternoon, so I'm free. He arrived less than an hour later, toolbox in hand, sleeves rolled up. She tried not to stare at the veins in his forearms as he crouched in front of the espresso machine. You know, he said, glancing over his shoulder, this thing's not broken. She shrugged. It made a weird sound. He chuckled. You call me for that. Sierra leaned against the marble island. I figured it was better to catch the problem early. Right, preventative maintenance, he said, standing up and wiping his hands on a towel. Or maybe you just wanted to see me again. She paused. That warm twist hit her stomach again. Don't flatter yourself. His eyes crinkled in the corners. Too late. He didn't flirt the way most men did with her. No slick lines, no fake compliments, just warmth, realness. They ended up sitting at the kitchen island, talking about Camilla, about life. She learned he used to work at a tech firm until layoffs hit, that he started taking on side jobs to make ends meet. I'm guessing this isn't your only gig, he said, nodding toward the high-rise view behind her. I run a private tech firm, she said simply. Figures, you've got that don't mess with me energy. She raised an eyebrow, and yet here you are, messing with me. He laughed. I like danger. When he left, he didn't linger. He didn't ask for anything. And she found herself staring at the door long after it closed. The next week, she invited him back. This time, there was nothing broken. She made up something about a glitching smart TV, but when he arrived, she confessed. I just wanted coffee. He looked amused. You called me over for coffee. Not just any coffee, she said, pouring him a cup. It's from a very elite blend. I'm honored, he said, lifting the cup. But you know, you could have just said you wanted company. Sierra hesitated. I'm not used to that. Being honest, he asked. Being seen. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, well, I see you, not the penthouse, not the job, you. That night, they didn't kiss. But Vaughn stayed for hours, and when he left, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. She didn't know what this was yet, but she knew she wanted to find out. Sierra didn't expect to see Vaughn again so soon. But 2 days later, she stepped out of a black SUV, heels clicking against the sidewalk, only to find him standing behind the glass counter of a local hardware shop in Brooklyn. She froze, one manicured hand still on the car door. He was helping an elderly man choose drill bits, his sleeves pushed up again, revealing a watch that looked too old to tell time. When he noticed her, his brow lifted just slightly, not in surprise, but like he'd already known she'd show up. How did you find me? He asked once the shop quieted, stepping out from behind the counter with a cloth still in his hand. I didn't, she said, brushing windblown strands from her face. I was on my way to a meeting nearby. Car needed gas. This was the closest station. I saw you through the window. He leaned against a display of paint cans. Fate or coincidence? She folded her arms. You don't believe in fate. You don't know what I believe in. I know you're running a hardware store now. He shrugged. I help out a few days a week. The owner's my uncle. It keeps things steady between gigs. Her eyes scanned the cramped space shelves packed with tools, floor tiles yellowed with age, a radio playing soft jazz in the background. It was a world away from marble floors and gold-trimmed fixtures. You're not what I expected, she said. That's the second time you've said that. I didn't say it the first time. You didn't have to. She studied him for a moment, came in to say thank you. For fixing your espresso machine. For not asking for anything. I don't do things expecting payback. Most people do. I'm not most people, Sierra. The way he said her name slow, certain made her pause. No one ever said it like that. Not even her father, who'd named the company after her when her mother died. He glanced at the time. I've got 20 minutes before I have to pick up Camilla from her reading club. Want to walk with me? She hesitated, then nodded. Sure. The sun had dipped low, casting long shadows over the sidewalk as they walked side by side. Every few steps he greeted someone by name: an old woman with a walking cane, a boy riding a scooter too fast, a man selling roasted peanuts from a cart. You know all these people? She asked. Brooklyn's not like Midtown. People notice when you disappear for a day. You like it here. I like real things, people who don't pretend. She glanced at him. Is that a jab? He met her gaze. No, just an observation. They stopped at a small park on the corner, where a group of kids sat in a circle under the shade of a tree while a young woman read aloud from a picture book. Camilla spotted them instantly. She ran toward her dad with a grin that nearly knocked him off balance when she hugged him. I drew something, Camilla said proudly, holding up a crayon-sketched paper. It's you and me and Penelope. Penelope? Sierra asked. My penguin, Camilla explained, her tiny fingers clutching the drawing. Vaughn crouched beside her. What do you say to the lady? Camilla turned to Sierra. You can keep it, you look lonely. Sierra's breath hitched. Why do you say that? You don't smile like people who have friends. Vaughn cleared his throat. Okay, kiddo, time for shoes. Sierra held the drawing gently, folding it once and sliding it into the inside of her coat. She's observant. She's blunt, Vaughn muttered. I blame cartoons. They sat on a nearby bench while Camilla played on the swings. Sierra crossed one leg over the other, her coat falling open to reveal the navy suit beneath. I never did things like this as a kid, she said quietly. Playgrounds, reading clubs, parks. My weekends were boardrooms and etiquette lessons. You turned out sharp. She turned her head, frowning. That's not really a compliment. It is when you mean it. The silence between them stretched not awkward, but thick with something that hadn't existed a week ago. Something neither of them had named. I have a charity event on Friday, Sierra said suddenly. He tilted his head. You inviting me? I'm not sure. Why? Because, don't know if you belong in that world. He looked away for a moment, then back at her. Maybe the question is whether you still do. That made her pause. She stood before she could think it through. Come anyway. He blinked, just like that. Dress code's black tie. Bring Camilla if you can find someone to watch her. I'll leave your name at the door. She walked away before he could answer, the folded drawing still tucked safely inside her coat. That night, Sierra stood at her bedroom window, looking out over a city painted in lights. The penthouse was quiet, too quiet. She turned down an invitation to drinks with the CFO, ignored 3 text messages from a hedge fund manager who kept asking if she was seeing anyone. She pulled the crayon drawing from her coat pocket and unfolded it. 3 stick figures, 2 smiling, 1 holding a penguin. She didn't sleep much that night. Friday arrived faster than expected. The ballroom at the Langford Hotel shimmered with candlelight and champagne. The chandeliers had been imported from Paris, the floral arrangements flown in from Argentina. Every guest was dressed to impress, and the press cameras lined the velvet ropes, waiting for their shot. Sierra stood near the entrance in a dress that had taken 3 fittings and cost more than most people's rent. She scanned the crowd. No sign of him. She tried not to care. Until a voice behind her said, I hope this tux counts as black tie. She turned. Vaughn stood just inside the door, looking like he'd stepped out of a magazine ad. The tux fit him perfectly, his hair combed back neatly. But it wasn't the expensive fabric or the polished shoes that made her breath catch. It was the way he was looking at her. Like she wasn't a CEO, or a guest of honor, or a name on a list. Like she was simply Sierra. "You came," she said, her voice quieter than she meant. "You invited me." And Camilla. With her aunt, she bribed her with bubble tea. Sierra offered her arm. "Come on, I'll introduce you to a few people." He took it without hesitation, letting her guide him toward the crowd of power players and industry titans. As they walked, someone whispered, "Who's that?" Another murmured, "Is he the new investor from Dubai?" Sierra didn't answer any of them. She didn't care what they assumed. Because for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was performing. She felt like she was exactly where she wanted to be. Sierra hadn't planned to leave the gala early, but the moment Vaughn took her hand under the ballroom's golden light, everything around her seemed to fade into static. The conversations, the clinking crystal, the carefully curated playlist, all of it dulled under the weight of his quiet presence next to her. "You don't belong here," she said, not unkindly. "That obvious?" he asked, glancing at the sea of tuxedos and couture gowns. "You're too grounded." He leaned close enough that she could feel the warmth of his breath. "You say that like it's a flaw." She tilted her head slightly. "It's not." They slipped away before dessert, exiting through a side corridor lined with velvet drapes and gilded sconces. Her driver was waiting, but Vaughn motioned for them to walk instead. They cut through the private back garden of the hotel, which opened onto a quiet street lit by soft amber lamps. The rain had stopped hours ago, leaving the pavement slick and reflective like glass. "You clean up well," she said after a beat. "I borrowed the tux from my brother-in-law. He wears it to weddings and funerals." "Let me guess, you hate dressing up." "I don't hate it," he said, his hands in his pockets. "I just don't like pretending to be someone I'm not." She paused at the curb. "Is that what you think I do?" "I think you've spent a long time building armor." Sierra stared at a passing taxi, watching the yellow blur disappear down the avenue. "You know what happens when you don't have armor in my world?" "You get hurt." "No, you get eaten." He didn't offer platitudes. He just nodded, understanding something she didn't even realize she'd wanted him to understand. They walked in silence until they reached a corner bistro with outdoor tables still damp from the rain. Vaughn stopped, glancing at the chalkboard menu. "You hungry?" She looked down at the sequined gown hugging her figure. "I'm not exactly dressed for grilled cheese." "Then we'll sit inside. I'll even pull out your chair." Inside, the bistro was warm and dimly lit, the scent of thyme and browned butter drifting in from the open kitchen. A young waiter blinked twice when he saw Sierra Ashton, the Sierra Ashton slide into a corner booth across from a man in a wrinkled tux with a loosened bow tie. Vaughn ordered a sandwich and a bowl of tomato soup. Sierra, after a pause, asked for the same. "You've never done this before, have you?" he asked, studying her. "Eaten grilled cheese. I'm not 5. "No," he said softly. "Let someone in without expecting them to leave." She didn't answer right away. People leave or they want something. "What do you think I want?" "I don't know, that's the problem." He leaned back, arms crossed. "I want you to stop looking for an ulterior motive. You're a single dad working 3 jobs. I'm a CEO with a board that measures my worth in quarterly gains. This," she gestured between them, "makes no sense." He didn't flinch. Maybe it doesn't have to. The food arrived, and for a while, they ate in silence, the kind that felt more like conversation than noise ever could. She watched him dip his sandwich into the soup, laughing when he offered her a bite of his after declaring it better than hers. She rolled her eyes and took it anyway. By the time they left, it was close to midnight. They stood at the edge of the curb again, the air cooler now, the city quieter. "Let me walk you to your car," he said. "My driver's around the block." "I'll still walk you." When they reached the sedan, she hesitated before opening the door. "I don't do this," she said. "Do what?" "Let things happen without controlling every part of them." He stepped closer. "Then don't think of it as letting go, think of it as choosing." She looked up, caught in the calm certainty of his expression. "I don't know how to choose something that isn't guaranteed." "You chose to call me back when nothing was broken." "I didn't say it out loud." "You didn't have to." She stepped onto her toes and kissed him. Not the kind of kiss that demanded anything, but the kind that acknowledged something had already begun. When she pulled back, his hands remained at his sides, steady. "You still have tomato soup on your collar," she said, brushing it off with her thumb. "Guess I'm not very elegant." "No," she whispered. "You're not. That's what makes you dangerous." He nodded once, and she climbed into the car without another word. At home, she bypassed her elevator and took the stairs to the duplex, her heels clicking against the concrete. She didn't know why she needed the extra time. Maybe to think, maybe to breathe. She opened a drawer in her study and pulled out a notebook she hadn't touched in years. Inside were scribbled ideas, half-dreamed inventions, and a long-forgotten sketch of a childcare app she'd once wanted to pitch before her father's death changed everything. She stared at the page, then picked up her pen. The next morning, she called Lauren. "I want to schedule a meeting with R&D. We're pivoting one of the projects." Lauren hesitated, understood. "Anything else?" "Yeah, reschedule the Friday board dinner. Have plans." That night, Sierra showed up unannounced at Vaughn's apartment in Williamsburg, wearing jeans and a gray coat that still smelled faintly of her perfume. She stood outside the building for a moment before pressing the buzzer. Camilla opened the door, holding a paper crown on her head. "You came," she said, grinning. Sierra crouched slightly. "I brought cupcakes, the kind with too much frosting." "Daddy said you might come. He's making spaghetti." Inside, the apartment was warm and chaotic, toys in corners, art taped to the fridge, music playing low from an old speaker near the window. Vaughn looked up from the stove, surprised but not startled. "Didn't think you'd show." "I canceled a dinner with 2 managing partners and a senator." "Big sacrifice." She took off her coat. "Let's see if your cooking's as good as your wiring." He handed her a spoon. "Taste test." She did, then nodded. "Better than the bistro." "Don't let them hear you say that." Camilla, now seated at the table, raised her hand. "Can I have 2 cupcakes?" Sierra smiled. "Only if I get one." That night, after Camilla fell asleep on the couch with Penelope wedged under one arm, Vaughn walked Sierra to the door. "You're dangerous too, you know," he said. "Why?" "Because I'm starting to want things, told myself, I didn't deserve." She reached for his hand. "Maybe it's time you stopped believing that." He didn't kiss her, not then. But the silence between them said everything. And for the first time, Sierra didn't feel like she was walking away from something. She felt like she was walking toward it. By the time March arrived, the frost had lifted from the city, and with it, something in Sierra. She didn't notice it all at once. It came in increments. A deeper exhale after a long meeting. A quiet laugh at a joke that didn't serve any purpose. A shift from calculating every move to simply being in the moment. She stood now in the middle of a sunlit studio in Brooklyn, an old converted textile factory with high ceilings and exposed brick walls. Vaughn had invited her to see the place he'd been helping renovate on weekends, a community tech space he was co-founding with a few old friends. "There's still a lot to do," he said, walking beside her with a toolbox in one hand and wood dust on his jeans. "But the idea is to give high schoolers access to real equipment. Coding, circuits, repairs, stuff they don't get in school." Sierra ran her fingers over a half-assembled workstation. "You're building this from scratch." "Mostly salvaged parts and sweat equity. We got a grant last week, barely enough to cover insulation. But it's a start." She turned to face him. "You didn't mention this before." "You never asked what I'd do if I had the chance." "I'm asking now." He shrugged, watching her carefully. "I want Camilla to grow up in a world where people care more about what they give than what they own." She didn't respond right away, just stepped into the beam of light streaming through the tall windows and looked around. "You could have taken a higher-paying job, gone corporate. You're good enough." "I've seen what that world does to people. You have everything and still feel nothing." She rested one hand on the edge of a tool bench. "Not nothing, just less than you thought you would." He nodded, then added, "I didn't bring you here to make a point." "Then why?" "I wanted you to see where it come alive." Sierra's throat tightened. "You did." That night, they cooked together in her kitchen for the first time. Not a private chef. No catered trays or imported ingredients. Just grocery bags he brought with Camilla's help and a recipe he swore by that involved too much garlic and a lot of stirring. She didn't touch her phone once. After dinner, Camilla nestled into the couch, watching a nature documentary with Penelope in her lap. Sierra and Vaughn stood by the window, sharing a glass of wine. "I spoke to my board this morning," she said. His brow lifted slightly. "About what?" "I proposed a pilot program, a mentorship initiative. We'd partner with local community projects, provide funding, resources, internships. I named your tech space as the first candidate." He blinked. "You serious?" "I don't do symbolic gestures." He studied her for a long moment. "You're changing." "I don't know if I am, or if I'm just finally stepping into something I didn't realize was mine." He set his glass down and moved closer, voice low. "I don't want to be another thing you collect and put on a shelf." "You're not." His hand brushed her cheek, slow and sure. "Then what am I?" She didn't hesitate. "You're the first person who made me want to stay." They kissed, then not tentative, not uncertain, but like two people who had stopped running from themselves. The next morning, she woke to the sound of clattering from the kitchen. Camilla was trying to pour cereal into a bowl without spilling, her tongue sticking out slightly in concentration. Vaughn entered a moment later, yawning and barefoot, and paused when he saw Sierra watching them from the hallway. "You're up early," he said. "I didn't want to miss this." He smiled, not with surprise, not with caution, just with quiet knowing. Days passed, then weeks. The mentorship program launched. Vaughn's tech space received its first shipment of donated laptops. Camilla started calling Sierra her, sometimes mom, which melted something inside her she hadn't known was frozen. And then came the gala, the annual corporate benefit Sierra had hosted every year since taking the helm of her father's company. It had always been about numbers, appearances, power. But this year, it looked different. The venue was the same, but the guest list had shifted. Students from Vaughn's program were seated beside investors. Teachers mingled with executives. Camilla danced in silver shoes, twirling between tables with Penelope tucked under one arm. Sierra stood at the podium, scanning the room. Her speech was short, no market projections, no growth statistics. "I used to think success meant standing alone at the top," she said. "But it turns out, real success is measured by who's standing beside you when you finally stop climbing." The applause felt different this time, not obligatory, not rehearsed. When she stepped down, Vaughn was waiting just offst. "I never thought I'd be part of something like this," he said quietly. "You didn't become part of it," she replied. "You helped me build it." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small box. "I was going to wait," he said, "but I've never been good at saving things." Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, a single stone set in a gold band that looked older than either of them. "My grandmother wore this every day for 50 years, Vaughn said. "When she gave it to me, she said, don't give it to someone who fits your life. Give it to the one who rewrites it." Sierra's breath caught. "You're really doing this here, in front of board members and teenagers." "I figured if you said yes here, there's nowhere you'd ever say no." She didn't cry, not because it wasn't emotional, but because it felt so certain. She slipped the ring onto her finger. "I'm not afraid anymore," she whispered. "Of what?" "Of being known." He kissed her quick, full of promise. The room around them blurred again, but this time it wasn't because it didn't matter. It was because, for once, she wasn't alone in the spotlight. Camilla ran up a moment later, grabbing both their hands. "Can we go get cake now?" Sierra laughed, the sound full and free. "Let's go." And just like that, the three of them walked back into the ballroom together, no longer from two different worlds, but one. Not because everything was perfect, but because they'd chosen something better. Real. The early April rain fell in soft, steady sheets as Sierra stepped onto the newly finished rooftop terrace of the tech center Vaughn had helped build from the ground up. String lights glittered overhead, and a small crowd of students, volunteers, and donors mingled with paper cups of cider in hand. Camilla stood near a tall potted fern, giving Penelope a tour of the new space, pausing every few steps to point out things like the snack table and the 3D printer. Sierra pulled her coat tighter, watching Vaughn across the terrace as he adjusted a projector screen for the upcoming student demo. His shirt sleeves were rolled, hair damp from the mist, and he was laughing at something one of the interns said. He looked completely in his element, and it struck her how seamlessly he'd built this world not just for others, but for himself, too. She walked over and tapped his arm. "You know the screen's upside down." He glanced at it, then back at her. "I knew that, just wanted to see if you were paying attention." "You're not fooling anyone." "You're here early," he said, nudging her shoulder gently. "I thought you had that strategy meeting." "I canceled. The board can wait. This can't." He looked at her for a moment before quietly saying, "I'm still getting used to hearing you say things like that." "I'm still getting used to saying them." She lifted her hand, brushing a drop of rain from his jaw. "But I mean it." The projector flickered on behind them, illuminating a student's hand-drawn blueprint. Laughter and applause floated through the air as the first presentation began. Later, after the event ended and the space had emptied out, Vaughn found her inside the main room, standing in front of a wall that had been painted with a mural, a collage of circuit boards, city skylines, and faces drawn in bold color. At the center was a quote in block letters: "Build the world you want to live in." "I didn't know you added that," Sierra said without turning. "I thought it fit." "It does." He leaned against the wall beside her. "Camilla asked me something yesterday. She wanted to know when we're going to be a real family." Her hand stilled at her side. "What did you say?" "I told her we already are, but I think she meant something else, something clearer." Sierra breathed in slowly. "You're thinking about the wedding." "I'm thinking it doesn't have to be a show. It can be ours, quiet, real." She turned to face him. "I don't care if it's in a courthouse or a backyard. Just want to be yours." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, offering it to her. "Then, I hope you'll say yes to this." Inside was a photo Camilla holding a handmade sign that read, "Will you marry my dad?" in shaky crayon letters. Sierra laughed, tears springing to her eyes. "That's cheating." "No," Vaughn said, taking her hands. "That's strategy." She nodded, pressing her forehead to his. "Yes, of course, yes." Exactly 3 weeks later, they stood beneath a canopy of cherry blossoms in a private garden in Brooklyn. Sierra wore a pale gold dress, simple and elegant, with her hair swept to one side. Vaughn wore a navy suit and a tie Camilla had picked out striped, slightly crooked, and completely perfect. There were no photographers, no press, just a dozen people who mattered. Camilla stood between them, holding the rings in a tiny velvet box with a ribbon tied around it. As the officiant spoke, Sierra reached for Vaughn's hand. "I didn't think I could have this," she said softly, her voice steady. "Not the love, not the peace, not the family. But you and Camilla, you reminded me who I wanted to be before the world told me who I had to become." Vaughn's eyes didn't leave hers. "You gave me something I didn't think it deserved. A second chance. A partner, a future." They exchanged rings, and Camilla clapped loudly before being scooped into a three-way hug that made everyone around them laugh. Afterward, they celebrated with homemade cake, laughter echoing through the garden. There were no speeches, no toasts, just stories shared, and music played on a borrowed speaker. Vaughn danced with Camilla, her feet on his shoes, while Sierra watched from a few steps away, heartful in a way she hadn't known it could be. That night, they returned home together, not as guests or visitors, but as a family. Vaughn carried Camilla into her room, tucking her in beside Penelope. When he returned, Sierra was curled up on the couch, barefoot, sipping tea. He dropped beside her, resting his head on her shoulder. "You realize this is the part where everything gets boring, right?" She smiled. "Good, I've had enough chaos to last a lifetime." They sat in silence for a while, the city lights casting soft shadows across the walls. "Eventually," she said, "do you ever think about what it would have been like if we'd met earlier?" He thought for a long moment. "Sometimes, but I don't think we were ready then." "And now?" "Now we're exactly where we're supposed to be." Years later, the photo of their wedding day still hung in their hallway. Not framed in gold or behind glass, but printed on thick paper and taped to the wall with Camilla's artwork around it, stick figures of their family, holding hands under a pink sky. Sierra never went back to running things from a distance. She remained CEO, yes, but she changed the structure, brought in fresh voices, created a culture that valued balance as much as brilliance. The mentorship program became a permanent fixture, expanding to 6 cities. Vaughn grew his tech space into a citywide initiative, mentoring hundreds of students who might never have set foot in a STEM classroom otherwise. And Camilla, she grew up in a house full of light and laughter. She still kept Penelope, even when she was almost too old for stuffed animals. Every time she got an award or aced a project, she'd say, "We're a team." And they were. Real, whole, together. Exactly the family they were meant to be.